In October 2023, an ordinary forestry worker performs a routine task in the remote Ardennes forest. The sharp, metallic screech of a bulldozer blade striking solid iron shatters the quiet morning air, vibrating through the cold autumn mist. They stop. A massive, rusted steel track system protrudes abruptly from the wet, dark earth. The sheer weight and fading olive drab paint trigger the local authorities being contacted immediately. When the European Military Antiquities Recovery Team arrives, they uncover an entirely intact, buried American armored vehicle. Inside lies a pristine US M3 half-track dated 1943, and a heavily welded, lead-lined lockbox that suggests this was a highly classified transport, not a forgotten battlefield casualty. Sergeant Miguel Campos was a hardened Spanish Republican fighter who commanded an American mechanized infantry squad during the liberation of Europe. According to official military records, he and his specialized vehicle were completely vaporized by a German artillery shell in late 1944. But the buried half-track tells a startlingly different story. The initial survey of the excavation site immediately raised red flags for the assembled historians. The vehicle had not been abandoned in a panic or destroyed in a firefight. It had been meticulously preserved, coated in thick cosmoline grease, and buried beneath 12 feet of dense soil, supported by reinforced wooden timber beams that had rotted away over 8 decades. The massive white 160-axe engine was fully drained of fluids, a deliberate preservation technique that takes hours to perform. Who would take the time to carefully entomb a 14-ton armored vehicle in the middle of a freezing European forest, while the most destructive war in human history raged around them? And more importantly, what was inside the vehicle that justified erasing its existence from the Allied logistical manifests? The M3 half-track was the undisputed backbone of American infantry mobility, a hybrid beast that carried millions of men across treacherous terrain. But this specific machine possessed modifications never seen on standard production lines. Its serial numbers had been brutally ground off with an angle grinder, and the standard communications radio had been replaced with a high-frequency, long-range, encrypted transmitter. For 80 years, the truth lay dormant beneath the roots of the Ardennes pines, waiting for the earth to finally yield its secrets. If you want to see how this incredible story unfolds, hit the like button. Before understanding why this specific machine was buried in secret, one must understand the unprecedented industrial miracle that birthed the M3 half-track. The story does not begin in the factories of Detroit, but decades earlier in the freezing, snow-swept landscapes of Imperial Russia. Adolphe Caigres was a brilliant French engineer tasked with an impossible problem: keeping Tsar Nicholas II's royal fleet of luxury vehicles moving through the deep Russian winters. Caigres was a meticulous, obsessive inventor in his late 30s, known for his relentless pursuit of mechanical perfection. He devised a revolutionary system, replacing the rear wheels of armored cars with a continuous flexible track while keeping the front wheels for steering. This hybrid design offered the off-road mobility of a heavy tank, but retained the high-speed road travel of a traditional truck. When the Russian Revolution ignited in 1917, Caigres fled back to France, taking his brilliant patents with him. However, it was the United States military that truly realized the terrifying potential of the half-track concept. In 1939, the global situation was rapidly deteriorating. The German Blitzkrieg had just annihilated Poland, utilizing highly mobile panzer divisions supported by mechanized infantry that moved at terrifying speeds. The American military establishment watched in absolute horror At that time, the United States possessed only a handful of obsolete tanks and practically zero mechanized infantry. General Adna Chaffee, an outspoken, visionary cavalry officer in his mid-50s, fiercely recognized that the era of horse-mounted combat was dead. Chaffee fought grueling political battles in Washington to create the U.S. armored force from scratch. He demanded a vehicle that could carry a heavily armed squad of riflemen at 50 miles per hour, keeping pace with the new armored divisions breaking through enemy lines. The American response was an industrial explosion, unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. Production Chief William Knudsen famously stated that America would win the war because they would smother the enemy in an avalanche of production. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States built an astonishing 56,000 half-tracks, completely dwarfing Germany's production of merely 15,000 equivalent vehicles. But this miraculous production masked severe early vulnerabilities. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass in North Africa in 1943, untested American troops faced the hardened veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps. The M3 half-tracks quarter-inch face-hardened steel armor proved disastrously inadequate against heavy German anti-tank fire. The troops morbidly nicknamed them Purple Heart Boxes. Despite these tragic early failures, the vehicle evolved. It was adapted into dozens of lethal variants, including the legendary M16 Meat Chopper, which featured 4 terrifying .50 caliber machine guns mounted on an electric turret, capable of shredding enemy aircraft and devastating ground targets. Yet, amidst this vast sea of standardized, mass-produced machinery, glaring discrepancies began to emerge in specific logistical sectors. Army quartermasters noted that certain M3 chassis were being diverted from standard infantry divisions to highly classified, unnamed intelligence units. What they didn't know was that a select group of these vehicles, including the one commanded by Sergeant Campos, were being fundamentally altered, stripped of their standard markings, and prepared for a shadow war that existed completely off the official grid. The journey of Sergeant Miguel Campos and his crew began under the burning sun of North Africa during Operation Torch. The M3 half-track, a roaring, 14-ton behemoth, proved to be an incredibly grueling machine to operate in hostile environments. The monstrous white 160-axe engine generated 147 horsepower, consuming high-octane fuel at an astonishing rate of 1 gallon every 3 miles. In the blistering deserts, the mechanics fought a daily, desperate war against the fine sand that infiltrated the constant mesh transmissions and choked the radiator louvers. The temperature inside the steel troop compartment routinely soared past 120 degrees Fahrenheit, creating an suffocating oven of cordite, sweat, and burning rubber. Campos's 13-man squad endured punishing physical conditions, bouncing violently over jagged terrain on rigid bench seats while constantly scanning the horizon for enemy armor. However, the true test of the M3 half-track's capability and the beginning of Campos's secret divergence occurred during the sprawling, chaotic breakout from Normandy in the summer of 1944. As the Allied forces smashed through the dense, claustrophobic hedgerows of the French bocage, the half-tracks proved essential. Their front-mounted unditching rollers allowed them to crush through heavy brush and cross deep anti-tank ditches that paralyzed standard-wheeled trucks. Campos was technically assigned to La Nueve, the famous 9th Company of the French 2nd Armored Division, comprised almost entirely of battle-hardened Spanish Republicans who had been fighting fascism since the Spanish Civil War. On August 24, 1944, The half-tracks of La Nueve were among the very first Allied vehicles to tear into the heart of occupied Paris. But as the celebrations erupted in the streets of the French capital, Campos received heavily encrypted priority orders that bypassed his standard chain of command entirely. While his comrades pushed aggressively east toward the German border, Campos and his heavily modified M3, unofficially christened El Fantasma, slipped away under the cover of a blackout. The official record states that Campos was killed in action during a minor skirmish near Strasbourg. In reality, his half-track had embarked on a covert, 300-mile journey through heavily contested territory. The weather deteriorated rapidly as autumn bled into the freezing, miserable winter of 1944. The tracks struggled to find grip on black ice, and the heavy steel armor became a freezing tomb, drawing the warmth directly from the soldiers' bodies. The hardships escalated from minor mechanical failures to near-catastrophic disasters. During a midnight crossing near the treacherous Ardennes sector, the fuel gauge plummeted to practically zero. A German patrol, heavily armed with Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets, was spotted moving through the tree line just 200 yards away. Campos had to make the agonizing decision to cut the loud engine entirely, ordering his men to physically push the 14-ton vehicle through knee-deep snow for 2 miles to avoid detection. The silence was agonizing, broken only by the crunch of boots and the agonizing creak of the rear tracks. The critical turning point arrived on December 16th, the explosive opening of the Battle of the Bulge. While the entire American front line collapsed under a massive German surprise offensive, Campos's rogue half-track used the unimaginable chaos to slip entirely behind enemy lines. Their objective was not combat, but retrieval. They navigated through burning villages and past columns of retreating American troops, moving aggressively toward a highly classified coordinate deep within the dense forest. By the time they reached the designated extraction point on December 22nd, the men were starving, frostbitten, and running entirely on adrenaline. They secured their target, a series of heavy crates guarded by a lone Allied intelligence officer, but the German encirclement had closed completely behind them. Escape was mathematically impossible. They had reached their destination, but they were trapped. In the immediate, chaotic aftermath of the Second World War, the newly formed United States Army Criminal Investigation Division, or CID, began the monumental task of auditing billions of dollars of military hardware. In 1946, a deeply thorough, highly competent investigator named Agent Thomas Vance was tasked with reconciling the equipment losses of the French 2nd Armored Division. When Vance reviewed the files regarding Sergeant Campos and his missing M3 half-track, glaring inconsistencies immediately surfaced. The combat report detailing Campos's supposed death by artillery fire lacked any corroborating witness statements. Furthermore, the logistical manifests showed that El Fantasma had been requisitioned for 400 gallons of aviation-grade fuel just 3 days after it was officially recorded as destroyed. Vance initiated a relentless string of interrogations, pulling surviving members of La Nueve into dimly lit offices in Paris. He asked highly specific questions about Campos's movements in late August 1944. The veterans, bound by their profound brotherhood and an unspoken code of silence, offered nothing but vague shrugs and conflicting timelines. Vance meticulously traced supply requisitions, cross-referencing encrypted radio logs, but continuously found missing pages and heavily redacted transit orders. The paper trail had been deliberately and expertly sanitized by someone incredibly high up the Allied command structure. However, hundreds of miles away, in a quiet, sun-drenched village near Bordeaux, a man living under the assumed name of Alejandro Silva was building a meticulously ordinary life. He worked as a humble agricultural mechanic, repairing tractors and old Citroën trucks. He married a local baker, had 2 daughters, and seamlessly integrated into the fabric of post-war rural France. To his neighbors, he was just another quiet survivor of the terrible conflict. He spent his Sundays drinking black coffee at the local cafe, his hands permanently stained with motor oil, his demeanor calm and entirely unremarkable. Yet Agent Vance remained deeply suspicious. For years, he quietly monitored post office records and wire transfers, looking for any sign of the missing Spanish Republican. Vance knew that a 14-ton armored vehicle does not simply evaporate without a trace, and a man like Campos does not die without a fight. As the 1950s rolled into the 1960s, the political landscape shifted drastically. The Cold War commanded the world's attention, and the hunt for a single missing half-track lost its funding and urgency. The time-passing montage of history moved relentlessly forward. Vance eventually retired, his meticulous files relegated to a dusty archive in Maryland. The trail went completely cold. The decades slipped away, turning living memory into static history. The old mechanic in Bordeaux passed away quietly in 1982 from heart failure. The secret died with him, or so they thought. The modern excavation of the Ardennes site in late 2023 was a masterpiece of forensic archaeology. The recovery team did not simply rip the half-track from the earth. They established a climate-controlled containment tent over the site, utilizing ground-penetrating radar, 3D laser scanning, and delicate pneumatic soil vacuums to preserve every microscopic piece of evidence. It took 3 exhausting weeks of 12-hour shifts just to safely expose the primary hull. The first major revelation occurred when the team breached the outer armored layer. They discovered that the vehicle's original half-inch armor plating had been secretly doubled in specific areas, utilizing experimental spaced armor techniques that the American military did not officially adopt until decades later. Furthermore, the mountings for the M16 meat chopper quad guns had been expertly torched off and replaced with custom-fabricated, heavy-duty suspension springs, indicating the vehicle was explicitly modified not to fight, but to carry a massive, concentrated amount of dead weight. However, as the team carefully pried open the rusted doors of the driver's cab, a second, far more intriguing layer of evidence emerged. Amidst the debris of perfectly preserved 1940s sea rations and a remarkably intact Bakelite steering wheel, a conservator found a false panel beneath the dashboard. Inside lay a leather dispatch pouch containing a highly detailed, hand-drawn topographical map. Forensic chemical analysis of the ink confirmed it was drafted in late 1944. The map detailed a clandestine route that deliberately bypassed the major offensive pushes toward Berlin, charting a dangerous, weaving path directly into a region known to house a covert Nazi weapons research facility. Cryptographic experts analyzing the marginalia realized the coordinates were aligned with British intelligence ciphers, not American. The mystery deepened dramatically when the team moved to the rear troop compartment. Using ultrasonic thickness gauges, architectural historians mapped the floor pan and discovered it was 4 inches higher than standard factory blueprints. They had found a hidden subfloor vault, heavily reinforced with a layer of poured concrete and steel plating. It took specialized plasma cutters 2 days to safely breach the secondary vault. Inside, they found 3 distinct, hermetically sealed steel canisters. The first canister contained large quantities of raw, unprocessed uranium ore, confirming long-held rumors that Allied shadow teams were desperately hunting down German nuclear materials before the advancing Soviet Red Army could capture them. The second canister held a staggering collection of microfilm rolls, detailing the blueprints for advanced German ballistic missile guidance systems. The half-track was literally carrying the foundational technology of the upcoming Cold War space race. But container number 3 held something that changed everything. Inside the final, heavy lead-lined vault lay a meticulously organized collection of highly classified diplomatic back-channel communications. These were not German documents, but explosive internal Allied memos dating from 1943. Forensic document examiners authenticated the signatures of top-tier British and American commanders. The documents explicitly detailed a contingency plan, code-named Operation Eclipse, outlining a secret, preemptive strike against Soviet forces immediately following the defeat of Germany. Campos had not just stolen enemy technology. He was the designated courier for the most sensitive, potentially catastrophic geopolitical secret of the 20th century. If these documents had been captured by German patrols and leaked to the Russians, the Allied coalition would have violently shattered before the war even ended. When his vehicle became hopelessly trapped in the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, Campos realized he could not risk the cargo being discovered by either side. He didn't abandon his post. He buried the fuse that could have ignited World War III. The unearthing of Campos's buried M3 half-track sent massive shockwaves through the global military history community. The historical significance of this discovery cannot be overstated. For 80 years, the American half-track was widely viewed and documented strictly as a rugged, dependable battle taxi, a mass-produced workhorse that dutifully ferried infantrymen from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of the Third Reich. General Omar Bradley once praised them for their utility, noting that without the half-tracks, the lightning-fast mechanized thrusts across Europe would have stalled in the mud. However, this specific discovery fundamentally reshapes what we thought we knew about Allied logistical operations. It proved, definitively, that amidst the immense, roaring machinery of conventional warfare, an entirely separate, phantom infrastructure existed. The M3 half-track was so ubiquitous, so perfectly unnoticeable in its sheer numbers, that it provided the ultimate camouflage for clandestine intelligence operations. Because 56,000 of these vehicles were manufactured, a single modified half-track moving through chaotic battlefields was practically invisible to both the enemy and standard Allied sentries. This revelation also provided a deeply satisfying vindication for the dismissed and forgotten investigators like Agent Thomas Vance. For decades, Vance's meticulous reports detailing missing vehicles, doctored fuel logs, and phantom serial numbers were largely ignored by military bureaucrats, written off as accounting errors in the fog of war. The discovery in the Ardennes proved that Vance's instincts were absolutely flawless. He had successfully mapped the edges of a massive cover-up, recognizing the shadow even if he could never quite catch the object casting it. Furthermore, this single vehicle blows the door wide open on the wider, highly rumored escape network of intelligence couriers. If La Nueve, a company of Spanish Republicans fighting under the French flag in American vehicles, was entrusted with British intelligence materials, it suggests a level of cross-national covert cooperation that deeply contradicts the established narratives of fractured Allied intelligence sharing. Historians are now furiously reopening the archives, searching for other ghosted half-tracks listed as destroyed in critical sectors. There are currently active, unresolved investigations scanning sites in southern Bavaria and along the Austrian border, searching for magnetic anomalies that might indicate other buried M3s. This explains why certain logistical blackouts occurred exactly where top-tier German technology vanished. The truth is, the War of Bullets ended in 1945, but the War of Secrets was transported in the armored bellies of these forgotten vehicles. Amidst the heavy steel, the raw uranium, and the explosive geopolitical documents, the most affecting discoveries inside the buried half-track were the smallest. Tucked behind the driver's seat, wrapped carefully in an oilcloth to protect it from the damp, the recovery team found a handful of personal objects that bridged the gap between the colossal weight of history and the fragile reality of the human experience. There was a beautifully worn, silver pocket watch, its hands forever frozen at 2:14, and a deeply faded black and white photograph of a young woman standing near the Plaza Mayor in Madrid. Most profoundly, they recovered a small, leather-bound journal. The pages were brittle, but the ink remained legible. It did not contain state secrets or military codes, but the quiet, agonizing reflections of Sergeant Miguel Campos. He wrote about the heavy toll of the endless fighting, the smell of the burning bocage, and his profound, unwavering love for the 13 men under his command. "They ask us to carry the fire," he wrote in Spanish in November 1944, "but they do not tell us how it burns our hands." Campos's final years in Bordeaux take on a heartbreaking new dimension. Living as a quiet mechanic, he spent nearly 4 decades carrying the crushing psychological weight of knowing exactly what lay buried in the dark woods. He watched the Cold War escalate on his television, knowing he had physically buried the blueprints to its genesis. When researchers finally tracked down his surviving daughter, Elena, now a woman in her late 70s, the reaction was a mixture of absolute shock and profound, bittersweet understanding. "My father was a quiet man, easily startled by sudden noises," Elena stated in a verified interview with the French Historical Society. "He always told us he just fixed engines during the war, to learn that he was sitting on a secret that could have destroyed the world. It makes me realize I never truly knew the man who kissed me good night." There is no glorification of war here, only the somber reality of a soldier who was forced to bury his past so deeply that it consumed his identity. History teaches us that the grand narratives of global conflicts are rarely written in the sweeping strokes of generals and politicians. They are often forged in the dark, desperate decisions made by ordinary individuals in the freezing mud. The United States industrial machine may have built 56,000 M3 half-tracks to smother fascism under an avalanche of steel. But it was the courage and burden of a single Spanish exile that turned one of those vehicles into a vault for the 20th century's most dangerous secrets. Today, the Ardennes forest remains quiet, the deep scar in the earth slowly healing under the falling autumn leaves, echoing the exact metallic stillness of the morning it was found. The remarkably preserved shell of El Fantasma currently sits under heavy guard in a specialized conservation wing of the Normandy Victory Museum, a haunting testament to the Shadow War. It is no longer just an armored personnel carrier. It is a monument to the things we bury to survive the peace. Yet if one half-track was hidden so perfectly, how many others remain lost beneath the soil of Europe? Comment which mystery we should investigate next.